I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the murder for hire of law professor and loving father Dan Markel, killed by two hitmen from South Florida, allegedly hired by his ex-mother-in-law. Here's the story. Dan Markel, a celebrated law professor and loving father, was shot execution style in his Tallahassee garage on July 18, 2014, in the middle of a vicious custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson, who was trying to move their children to South Florida. Prosecutors say the real motive lay not with Wendi herself, but within her family. Charlie Adelson, her brother, and a wealthy Miami area dentist orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot to end Markel's resistance to relocation and assure full custody and control. In November of 2023, just days after Charlie was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation, Donna Adelson, his mother, and Markel's former mother-in-law, was arrested at Miami Airport moments before boarding a flight to Vietnam. She now faces identical charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation, accused of funding and coordinating the lethal plot rooted in vengeance and the control of Dan's children. Held without bond, her trial is now set for this month, while the once elite Adelson family crumbles under public shock and courtroom exposure. Classic example of a case that should have been handled entirely in family court that ended up in criminal court because of the murder for hire and the death of Dan Markel. So what was going on in this battle, right? It's a divorce battle, so you're battling about lots of things. Custody of the children obviously is huge. The financial settlements, you know, two people that are together building a family that are then pulling apart. Sometimes it's not that easy. A lot of times it's not that easy to do. I want you to take a listen to Stephen Webster, who is Dan Markel's post-divorce attorney. That's what he calls himself, because he came in afterwards. There was a mediation initially. Here he is describing some of what was happening in this battle between Dan and Wendi.
I told Dan, I said, we need to send over request for admissions that require her to admit that she committed fraud in her financial disclosures in the underlying divorce proceeding. It's going to be a Hobson's choice for her. She can either admit that she committed fraud, which as a lawyer, a fraud on the court and fraud in general, which as a lawyer, fraud is not a great thing. That's a quick way to lose your license. Or she'll just commit another act of fraud because she'll lie on the request for admissions. If she denies it, we've got the proof. So we'll prove then she's committed 2 acts of fraud on the court.
So things, you know, not amicable. There are you know, Dan on the one side questioning her truth and her veracity of what she was saying during the course of this divorce, whether it's relative to financial issues and other. Everything is connected to everything. So what exactly was going on here? What was the state of what was happening? That brings us to the first question in our investigation. How contentious was Dan and Wendi's divorce? Because prosecutors believe absolutely this is the driving force to the murder for hire of Dan Markel. Here to help answer that question tonight is Jason Solomon, who is a friend of Dan Markel, and Brandy Churchwell, host of the 13th Juror podcast and Crime Junkie Jury on YouTube. Thank you both for being here. Jason, from your perspective, how, you know, we hear about the cliche, the bitter divorce, et cetera. How would you describe the ongoing and what was happening in the breakup of these two as they were trying to resolve all these issues that you have to resolve when you start a family together?
Yeah, it's interesting and unfortunate because on the one hand, it was, of course, very bitter and very contentious ultimately, but in some ways it wasn't. In other words, for more than a year before Dan's death, they had had a settlement agreement in place. They had settled their divorce. They weren't fighting over money. They weren't fighting over custody. There was no dispute that they were splitting both the money and the kids' custody 50-50. So what were they fighting about? They were really fighting about two things at the end related to the enforcement of that settlement agreement about the divorce that were related to access to the kids, both Dan's access to the kids and then Wendy's mom, Donna, the woman who's going on trial in a few weeks, and her access to the kids. So what happened was, one thing that was really important to Dan, because he cared about his kids so much and seeing his kids and talking to his kids every day, is that he insisted on having a provision in the agreement that Wendi agreed to, that even when Wendi had the kids, he got to talk to them on FaceTime every day at dinner time, late afternoon, something like that. Now, as you can imagine, that was difficult with young kids, and I think Dan, and so it didn't always happen, and Dan was very upset about that, understandably. He thought maybe Wendi wasn't working hard enough to make it happen. My guess is Wendi felt like she still was being controlled by Dan and might have regretted agreeing to that. And so what Dan decided at some point is he decided he needed to play hardball, and that gets to the excerpt you played from his divorce lawyer earlier. And he filed motions both to sort of accuse Wendi of fraud in talking about her assets and this relates to Donna's access to the kids, Wendy's mom. He filed a motion saying that Wendy's mom, Donna, could not have access to the kids unsupervised, that she couldn't be alone with the kids because Dan had learned that she had called Dan names. She had called Dan stupid or something like that in front of the kids, and that was very upsetting to Dan as well. So that's what they were fighting over at the time of his death, and I think that sort of escalation in the last few months is ultimately what led the Adelson family to decide to go through with this plan, although there's lots of evidence that they explored this plan much earlier.
Let's take a listen, Brandy, to a little bit more from Stephen Webster talking about what was happening in this divorce.
So the divorce was finalized, and the dispute that I was brought in to represent Dan on involved failure to perform under the divorce terms. There were allegations Dan had not paid some of the monies he owed that he agreed to pay pursuant to the divorce decree. But Dan also had accusations that Wendi had not performed and been forthright and honest in how the things that she filed during the divorce. So there were basically allegations of contempt going both ways. So the divorce was contentious, and they settled at mediation, and Dan, I think, gave up maybe more than he had to. I don't believe Dan wanted to have a hearing, a full-blown divorce hearing. So he wanted to settle. That was important for him. But he was able to put in the divorce decree the language about if it is later discovered that somebody did not fully divulge their financial assets, that's a material breach of this contract, and it will be treated as a breach of contract action from that moment forward.
So, Brandy, how do you see what's happening in this breakup as it relates to the most important part of what happened here, which is the motivation to hire hitmen to kill Dan Markel?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, this divorce was obviously messy from the start. Like you said, there was, dispute over money and custody, but the biggest thing was the relocation, and that argument that they had going back and forth where she wanted to relocate to South Florida and he didn't want, to be away from his kids. That is the driving force in this. They were still arguing about that after everything had been decided on the divorce. So just weeks before Dan's murder, a judge had once again ruled against allowing Wendi to relocate with the children. So it's hard not to think that that provides a motive for his murder, because it was only weeks later. And for Dan, I think it wasn't just about geography. Moving those boys to South Florida, that's from Tallahassee, that's what, a 7-8 hour drive or something like that. So it's really hard to see him working so hard to be a good dad and be present for their lives and losing his because of it.
Yeah. Jason, how well did you know Dan before the divorce? Were there, or did you ever talk about, the good times in the marriage and what really caused this breakup?
Yeah, I knew him fairly well for at least a few years before the divorce. You know, it's interesting. The two of us, we were both law professors who had challenges with our spouses. Fortunately, I was able to work mine through. But our greatest opportunities as professors were in college towns, and our spouses were, you know, very career-oriented and accomplished in their own right, and really their best opportunities were in cities. And, you know, that creates kind of a hard dynamic on the marriage where one person feels like they're the trailing spouse and one spouse feels like they're not equal. And so I think that played a large role. And certainly, as we know, Wendi felt stuck in Tallahassee. She would have rather been in someplace like New York or D.C. She was in immigration law. That's what she wanted. That's what she wanted to do. The two of them met in D.C. Or if not New York and D.C., Miami, where she had family. You know, I think one thing and one reason why Dan remained bitter is he thought they were working on the marriage. They were going to therapy together, couples counseling. They were each doing therapy. He thought they were working on it. And I guess at some point in there, Wendi decided, no, I'm done. I don't want to work on it anymore. Certainly, she was heavily influenced by her mother and by her brother, who hated Dan. But, you know, ultimately, that was her decision.
All right. Brady Church, well, thanks so much. We're a little short on time right now, but I appreciate it. We'll see you soon. Jason's going to stick around. Coming up next, what kind of father was Dan Markel?
Dan was the greatest father I ever had the opportunity to meet, and that was how he was all the time. I mean, he was constantly playing with his children, drawing with his children.
Matriarch of the Adelson family gets arrested.
Donna Adelson is facing charges of murder, the death of her former son-in-law, Dan Markel.
Prosecutors say a bitter child custody battle was the motive for the murder-for-hire plot.
Now that Donna has turned into a defendant, what's next for the Adelson clan?
Now that the ship is really sinking fast, blood doesn't matter that much.
The Matriarch Mastermind murder trial. Live coverage begins August 19th, only on Court TV.
Who would want Dan Markel dead? And within 1 hour of the shooting, before Professor Markel was even pronounced dead, this path was already pointing to the defendant. When his sister revealed to law enforcement that her family hated Dan Markel and that her brother, Charlie, had joked about hiring a hitman to kill him.
Could you imagine being murdered because you wanted to be there for your children? You wanted to be present with your children and be a part of their lives? That's what this case is about. Why don't you take a listen to some folks remembering Dan Markel.
Dan Markel was a colleague, teacher, mentor, and good friend to many of us. Even today, after 9 years, it's difficult, and we continue to miss him.
I'm very upset about this whole situation, and everything that everyone has said about Dan Markel is golden. It upset me so much that I would take fresh orchids down and leave them by the home when he had passed many times. And I just can't believe that there's people alive that would be willing to take so much from so many people for no reason.
And you know, when you talk about Dan Markel, obviously incredibly smart, intelligent, a great mind, but you know, there's the other part of Dan Markel, and it's the part that's so much connected to what happened here, and it brings us to the next question in our investigation. What kind of father was Dan Markel? Here to help with our investigation, Jason Solomon, friend of Dan Markel and former state attorney from Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Arenberg. Dave also knew Dan Markel. Jason, how, you know, that's, I think it's probably the most important question in this whole story, right? Is Dan Markel as a father. How would you describe him?
Oh, he was a wonderful father. He was so involved. He just didn't want to miss a minute with his kids. And that's what that fight was about ultimately in terms of enforcing the settlement agreement. He really wanted to talk to his kids every day. They were young. They were just growing up. And he wanted to be able to have contact with them every day. That was something that he asked to be part of the settlement agreement. And he felt like Wendi wasn't living up to that. And that's why he didn't pay all the money he was owed. That's why he ultimately filed those motions, because he really wanted to talk to his kids every day and really be a part of their lives. And he was so warm and so loving with them. So,
you know how many children across this country who don't have that? You know, you think about it, the massive number of children that don't have a dad who wants to be there day in and day out for every moment. Dave, let's take a quick listen to Stephen Webster and his description of Dan.
Dan was the greatest father I ever had the opportunity to meet. And that was how he was all the time. I mean, he was constantly playing with his children, drawing with his children. I mean, they were everything to him, everything. But Dan was not going to back down when it came to the children. He was not going to relent. He was not going to surrender his right to have time with his children for anything. He didn't care about the money. He would have given up the money, but he was not going to, I mean, he wouldn't relent an inch on his parenting time with those boys. One of the things he asked of me that he wanted to try to see if we could get this relief was he wanted to modify the agreement so that he would be allowed to see his sons for just 5 minutes every night to tuck them when they were tucked into bed so he could kiss them good night. And I was like, I mean, it's beautiful that you want to do that, but no court is going to grant that relief. But that was where his focus was, okay? And, you know, it's come out now that they were trying to pay Dan off. They were offering him money if he would allow them to relocate the children. And anybody who knew Dan, they would know that that would never, ever happen. I don't care how much money they offered Dan. They could have offered Dan $20 million to allow them to relocate those children to Miami. Dan would have never taken it.
And Dave Arenberg, as we think about, you know, why Dan Markel is not alive, why Dan Markel can't be with his children, it's because he wanted to be with his children.
Right. Yeah, exactly, Vinny. He loved his children dearly. They were his life. I remember going to his Facebook page and seeing lots of pictures of his children and not many pictures of Wendi. In fact, after they went through the divorce, the children's pictures were everywhere. And Danny never trashed Wendi in front of me. I never heard him say a negative word of her. You know, he really was a wonderful person, a kind-hearted person, and he wanted to be there for his kids. And so when he was offered the bribe of $1 million, remember, he's a guy who lived off of a government salary, and he was offered $1 million to allow the children to go down to South Florida and live with their mother and her family down there. He said no. And it's especially cruel to know that for years, the family got what they wanted after Danny was murdered. They got the kids moved from Tallahassee to South Florida immediately, right after Dan was buried. And then they took the last name, Markel, off of their last name and installed Adelson. So the kids are now growing up with the last name of Adelson, wiping out Danny's legacy permanently, forever from their names.
Cruel. It's absolutely cruel. Jason, how do you think things would have turned out if he wasn't murdered? If there wasn't this plan, this plot to take him out, and it just sort of proceeded, you know, the way it should, through family court and through mediation and through trying to figure things out. How do you think this would have ended up for the family?
You know, I think things would have eventually calmed down. I think that they would have resolved whatever motions related to the divorce litigation. They certainly were working out many of the custody issues already. And I think Dan would have gone on to be, you know, a wonderful teacher at Florida State, training generations of law students, to be lawyers, an incredible scholar, exploring the boundaries of knowledge about the criminal law and how we ought to think about how the law responds to wrongdoing. And I think he would have been a wonderful father, and helped raise those kids to be wonderful boys. Of course, now they are, I'm sure, so scarred by all that has happened, and I hope that they can get through that. But as you indicated before, Vinny, the place to resolve these things is family court, with mediators, with others who can help you resolve these things. The problem was that Dan had married into a family that was used to getting their way with everything. And there's a tendency to look at this case and think about motive in terms of, they wanted to have Wendi and the kids move to South Florida, therefore they decided, let's get rid of Dan. But it was really more than that, and it was less rational than that, in my view. It was a family that was used to getting their way and just couldn't stand that this person, Dan Markel, would be in the picture, would influence how, for Donna, who you're showing now, Wendi's mom, how her baby daughter, who she had so much invested in, how her grandkids would live their life. Dan wanted to raise them fairly Jewish. Wendi's family, even though they were Jewish, did not want to do that. And so this is just a family of narcissists that was used to getting their way, and they just couldn't stand, and it just drove them crazy that another person had say in how they would live their lives and how their daughter and their grandkids would live their lives.
That's such a great perspective and understanding of all this. Jason Solomon, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Dave Arenberg is going to stand by. Up next, here's the big question for the upcoming trial. Will Donna testify? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic death of loving father Dan Markel. He was in a bitter custody battle that went from family court to criminal court when his ex-brother-in-law and mother-in-law were charged with orchestrating a murder-for-hire plot. Here's the story. Dan Markel, a respected Florida State law professor, was gunned down in his driveway in 2014, an execution-style killing that stunned the academic and legal communities. As investigators peeled back the layers of his bitter custody battle, a disturbing family dynamic emerged. At the center were his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson, and her mother, Donna Adelson, whose deep involvement in Wendi's personal affairs raised suspicions. Prosecutors allege Donna orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot with her son Charlie to eliminate Dan and free Wendi to relocate with her children to South Florida. Prosecutors allege emails and secretly recorded conversations suggest Donna was the family matriarch, pulling the strings, pressuring Wendi, managing finances, and expressing chilling resentment towards Dan. Though Wendi has not been charged, her closeness to Donna and the family's coordinated actions have drawn sharp public scrutiny. Donna now faces charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation, a dramatic fall from grace that has shattered a once prominent South Florida family. So we've heard a lot about Donna Adelson as we've gotten closer and closer to the start of this trial, and people have been talking about her throughout, especially during the trial of her son, Charlie Adelson. But who is she? What's her history? What do we know about Donna Adelson? Well, I had to dig this one out. Here's Donna appearing on the show Wheel of Fortune in 1989.
And we now meet Donna Adelson from Coral Springs, Florida. I want to hear all about you, Donna. Let's go.
Well, I'm a domestic coordinator.
A domestic coordinator?
Yes. I'm responsible for the activities, classes, and lessons of my son Robert, who is 16, Charlie, who is 12, Wendi, who is 10, my husband Harvey, who's in the audience, and my dog Sam.
Donna.
F.
Yes.
Mischief maker.
Yeah, that's it, Donna.
Unbelievable, right? Talking about her children, right? Very important. Domestic coordinator. And then she solves the puzzle, which I don't know how she solved it, but she knew it was mischief maker. Okay, so her trial just around the corner brings us to the next question in our investigation. And it's always, you know, the biggest question we always have during a trial about the defendant. Will Donna testify? Her son Charlie did, by the way. Here to help answer the question, mitigation specialist and defense investigator who worked on this case, Monica Jordan. She worked on the case for the hitman Luis Rivera, who pleaded guilty. Also with us, former state attorney, Palm Beach County, Florida, and friend of Dan Markel, Dave Arenberg. Okay, this happened in court. I've got to show you something, then we'll talk about it. Take a listen to Donna Adelson's lawyer in court. Listen very closely to what he says. Let's watch.
Especially with the call that my client made to the undercover on May 6th of 2014 when he became verbally aggressive towards my client. That factors into his role as a Latin King gang member. And I know in the previous hearing last year, Your Honor questioned whether there was a difference between a Latin King gang member and simply a gang member. The answer is absolutely. In Miami, in South Florida, there is absolutely a difference between a gang member and a Latin King gang member.
Even with that being said, this ultimately goes to your client's state of mind. Who is going to establish how she knows the difference between, forgive the pun, the garden variety gang member and a specific gang member?
I think between her testimony and anticipated testimony of Charlie Adelson.
Boom! Dave, did he spill the beans today, Dave Arenberg?
Yeah, she's testifying. It went so well for Charlie. Why not do it again? She's going to meet the same fate. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Charlie thought he could snow the jury. He is, after all, the maestro. That's his vanity license plate on his Ferrari. And Donna, his mother, thinks the same way, that she can just charm the jury. Tell you this, though, when she took the stand in the pre-trial hearings, she didn't do so well. So, yeah, she's going to take the stand. She's going to talk about the double extortion plot that got Charlie nowhere. It's going to get her nowhere. Guilty, in my mind.
Monica Jordan, it seems like she is going to testify at her trial. What type of witness do you think she's going to be?
I think she's going to be much like Charlie, a narcissist, and it's everybody else's fault but her own. Dave Arenberg's absolutely right. It wasn't very successful for Charlie, but they have to keep beating this drum and this theater that there was an extortion, and that's where all this money came from. We weren't involved in a hit or trying to kill Dan Markel, my son-in-law, my brother-in-law. We were just paying money to this extortion. They're attacking the only solid thing the government has that has been consistent throughout all of these trials, and that's Luis Rivera. So now they're going to make him a feature of this trial, and if they think they're going to flap him or make him testify differently, that's not going to happen. He's been consistent. This will be his 5th trial. He's had numerous depositions, but now with the statement that was made in court by Mr. Zellman, I think it's very clear what their theory of defense is going to be.
Yeah, it looks like they are going down that same exact road. Now, you also mentioned something else, Dave, that the anticipated testimony of Charlie Adelson. That kind of caught my attention as well. The defense calling Charlie. Do you think that's a possibility? I know he's banking on the fact that he's going to win his appeal, but do you think he could testify?
Yeah, I think he will for his mom, and that's their corroboration. One liar after the next. The double extortion plot is so ridiculous because you'd have to believe that the two hitmen drove 8 hours from Miami to Tallahassee twice. Remember, they had to go twice to kill an enemy of the Adelsons, only to come back and say, okay, we killed your enemy. Now you've got to pay us or else we're going to kill you. Why go up there and kill their enemy? Why not just skip that part and just say, give us the money or we'll kill you? And here's the other thing. When the bump happened, Donna was so scared and so appalled that someone would dare ask her for $5,000. She didn't pay them. She tried to talk him out of it. She was pleading with him. There's no way she would pay $5,000. Go to the police. I'm not paying you. But when it comes to paying out $300,000 to the hitman, go ahead. Knock yourself out. Do you want that in 10s, 20s, 50s? It doesn't make any sense.
Monica, what are your thoughts about Charlie coming to testify for mom?
Well, he can't give a different story now because he's on appeal. So you can't, while you're in post-conviction efforts, you can't go, oh my gosh, that sucked. That didn't work. Let me try this. This is, you only have two real issues. It's either ineffective assistance of counsel or newly discovered evidence. You can't create the newly discovered evidence in post-conviction by saying my original story on the stand didn't work. So I want to testify differently at my mom's trial. And if it works for her, we want to use that claim in post-conviction. That is absolute nonsense.
Dave, what are your thoughts about the folks in Tallahassee, how they'll react to Donna? That's where the jury's coming from.
They're going to hate her. They're going to hate her. They're going to hate her. I know. I live in South Florida, in Palm Beach County, and I spent a lot of time in Tallahassee. I lived there for 8 years most of the time when I was in the legislature. And there is this feeling that people in Tallahassee feel towards South Florida that South Florida looks down upon them, that they're this small town up there. They don't get any cred from the big city slickers in South Florida. And Donna Adelson is the epitome of that. And you don't have to just do it based on a stereotype. She said it herself. It's coming in. She hated Tallahassee. She wanted out of there. She wanted the kids out of that podunk town. And that jury is going to hate her. And I mean, that's one reason why at least she got local lawyers this time, because last time they got a big-time Miami lawyer, which didn't work out well for Charlie, and Donna was going back with him, and then he got recused. Now they've got local lawyers. That's good for her.
Yeah,
Still,
I always
they're
think
not going to be
local
able to help her out of this.
Yeah.
The facts are so bad.
You need the local touch in a lot of these jurisdictions. Dave Ehrenberg, great to see you. Thank you so much. Monica's going to stick around. Still to come, how did Donna really feel about Dan?
He saw Donna as dangerous. Wendi heard him, but Donna was dangerous. So it was always, Dan knew it.
A woman's remains found scattered throughout a 3-mile area.
Now, a former naval officer stands trial accused of killing his wife.
The Dismembered Wife murder trial. Live coverage weekdays, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
I want you to answer the question. What was the most important part
of the divorce for my mom?
Yes.
It says here that for her it was relocation.
It absolutely was. I mean, Donna Adelson was very, very involved in this custody battle and divorce. Very involved. And there's a reason. I think it's because of the type of mother she was. Take a listen to Wendi Adelson describing the type of mother and her relationship with Donna.
Is your mom overprotective of you?
Yes.
All right. And is it fair to say she's, a little on the controlling side?
I don't think she's controlling, but she's definitely overprotective.
Did she ever try to micromanage your life?
Maybe, yeah.
Did she have an interest in who you were dating and who you weren't dating and who you should be dating when you were single?
I think she was usually disappointed that I wasn't dating more.
Okay. For example, isn't it true that she would not let you drive to and from Tallahassee to South Florida?
Well, I used to drive before I had the boys, but they were young and she preferred to come with me and give me some extra support.
Was she controlling? No. Well, maybe. Yes, she was. Yes, she was. She was running the show for Wendy's entire life. So we know what that relationship was like. But how about the relationship of Donna with her son-in-law, who became her ex-son-in-law, Dan? That brings us to the next question in our investigation. How did Donna really feel about Dan? Still here to help us with our investigation, Monica Jordan, and joining us, host of the true crime podcast, Hidden Killers, Tony Bruschi is with us. Great to have you both here. There you are. You were hiding from me. The elusive, hidden Tony Bruschi has been found. Okay. I want you to take a listen to this, because I think this is interesting, listening to Wendi talking about Donna and being cross-examined about Donna and Dan, and then we'll talk about this relationship, which is extremely important for the trial.
Did your mother, Donna Adelson, review the filing in which Dan Markel is accusing you of this theft and all this stuff?
I don't remember if she did.
What about the one where Dan Markel is asking that your mother not be permitted to have unsupervised visitation with the kids?
My mom never saw that, because after he filed that, he then asked my parents to babysit the kids. And my mom baked him banana bread, gave him a hug goodbye. So there was nothing truthful about that pleading that he filed, and my mom never saw it.
Why do you think he filed that?
He was really angry at me for leaving him.
Did your mom call Dan any disparaging names around this time frame?
Well, I just read them in the emails, but I don't remember them independently.
Okay. Did she call him an ass?
Yes.
A narcissist?
Yes.
A bully?
Yes.
Religious zealot?
Yes.
Bastard?
That I don't remember.
Page 5.
Yes.
Okay. Tony Bruschi, what do you think's going on in this? How do you think she really felt about Dan Markel, her ex-son-in-law?
Well, I think it goes a little bit darker than banana bread. I'd be checking that banana bread. They should have tested that banana bread, quite honestly. She was never sold on Dan Markel, even before the divorce went down. Even during the marriage, she saw him as, and she would say, rigid, controlling, and a poor fit for Wendi, which is kind of funny because that's how everybody sees Donna Adelson. It's a little projecting going on there. And their values also clash. Dan is a Jewish individual, and his lifestyle very much clashed with Donna's more secular, flexible approach, ignoring his request for kosher meals for the kids. They were just like, let's go to McDonald's, whatever, and really undermining his rules and actually telling Wendi that that she could do better. And then, of course, after the divorce, the quiet disapproval became even more hostile, and Dan's refusal to let Wendi move the boys to South Florida, that really kind of set her off. Floated that $1 million bribe in front of him. That didn't work. Threatened to raise the kids Catholic. That didn't work. And according to filings, then told the boys their father was, quote, stupid, and that she hated him for taking her sunshines away. And by then, she wasn't just clashing with him. She wanted him out of the way.
Yeah, Monica, it seemed like this custody battle wasn't Dan versus Wendi. It was Dan versus Donna.
Absolutely. I think Tony did a beautiful job of verbalizing all of the things of how Donna probably felt about him, about Dan. Donna, I think, initially probably really enjoyed telling the world that her daughter was marrying a Harvard Law graduate. I mean, if you look at it, her oldest son was a medical doctor. Her second son was a dentist and who liked strippers. And then there was Wendi, who's dating and marrying the Harvard Law graduate. I think when you think about how did Donna really feel about Dan, well, the Second Judicial Circuit has told you exactly how they feel about her. She's charged with the murder of Dan Markel and being a co-conspirator in the mastermind conspiracy to kill this poor man. So all of the things that Tony said, it was so eloquent and absolutely on point. But the biggest thing is that she was a part of this. She's not a part of an extortion. She was part of trying to kill this man because he was going to beat them. He was going to have a part of those boys' lives. And the only way out was to kill him. And that's what they did. And as a result, those two children have been denied any relationship with their biological paternal grandparents. And I think that's just an awful, awful thing.
Absolutely. Now, I want you to take a listen to Stephen Webster speaking here. This is Dan Markel's post-divorce attorney talking about this relationship and how also Dan viewed Donna.
But I think Dan quickly understood that Wendi would not have left him the way she did if Mom had not been involved in it, that Mom was definitely involved in it. And so when, Dan was hurt by Wendi, but he saw Donna as dangerous. Wendi hurt him, but Donna was dangerous. So it was always, Dan knew it. I don't know if she just didn't like Dan from the beginning, or if it was because he refused to relocate the children, that was when, she turned her hatred up to level 10. But she was at level 10 for Dan from the beginning of the divorce. I think this trial is going to reveal far more of just the true animosity that Donna had towards Dan. And I think that will eventually become crystal clear, that any attempt by Donna and her team to suggest that their relationship was fine, I mean, she baked him bread or anything like that, is going to just be completely eviscerated by the record evidence.
Tony Bruschi, it sounds like there might be some stuff that we haven't heard yet that may make its way into this trial.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what we have not heard yet, what sort of communications are out there between Donna and others. Because what you're looking at here at the end of the day is an enmeshed family. That's a family where the leader is always going to be number one. That happens to be Donna in this fairy tale. And the kids, they'll do whatever they need to. And never, I think, ever quite noting just how dark and potentially damaging Mom could possibly be until it's too late. And at the end of the day, that's what came to roost here. I really wonder how much Wendi knew, or how much she just kind of pretended not to know, or just put her head in the sand to, and how she will react when she takes the stand here again in the new trial.
Yeah, and after this trial, if she's convicted, there's 2 more South Florida Adelsons, and we'll see what happens with all of that. Tony Bruschi, Hidden Killers, Monica Jordan, thank you both so much. Great to see you, and we'll be talking a lot as this trial gets even closer. Divorces with custody battles can sometimes be extraordinarily bitter, especially when it comes to where the children should live. And sometimes people lose perspective. And while fighting for the kids, when they lose perspective, they end up doing a lot of harm to the same children that they want to be with. The question in this case is going to be, would a grandmother get so invested that she would have her grandchildren's father murdered? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.